humanity, no matter where they found themselves on the earth, will always have three things in common: birth, life, and death. And of these three core human sureties, none inspire as much fear, uncertainty, fascination, and horror as death does. Gods and spirits and deities come in all shapes and sizes, and each core theme can be represented in a million different ways across culture and space, but not death. Death gods and guardians of the underworld are always depicted with dark undertones, hideously disfigured features, and ominous intentions. Well, nearly always. And it is man's last source of endless, dreaded tension when he reaches old age and begins his final watch for the being that will guide him to the other side when his time finally comes. The only culture in the history of mankind that has not attributed a deity to death is the modern-day culture of academia. Despite the entirety of humanity's existence believing otherwise, the brightest minds of our day believe that there is no evidence of the afterlife. We'd beg to differ. There's more than enough evidence. You just need to be willing to pull back the curtain to seek it. Do you want to see what's on the other side? Once you receive the knowledge of how the gods of old are all connected, there's no turning back anymore. Welcome to the Vortex, where mythology, lore, and history collide. Before we take a trip across the globe to observe how men have materialized the mysterious, yet constant, reality of death, take a second to click that like button and to subscribe to the channel. And while you're at it, why not tell us about your culture's unique personification of the afterlife in the comments down below. So let's start the pilgrimage of passing souls in South America, where the first, and in some ways more predictable, common themes kick up. Skeletal figures are used to depict the various gods across the continent throughout the ages. This is completely understandable. The bones are the last remnants of a person's life after they die, so the comparison is to be expected. Starting with the Aztecs of old, we see Mictlantecuhtli and his equally skeletal wife, Mictlantecuhtli, clad in black and white, accompanied by their black beast dog, ruling the underworld down below. Yet they were not purely malevolent, acting also as guides, safeguarding souls as they passed through the afterlife's trials. Skeletons are just the first expected commonality of death deities across the globe. That the underworld where spirits reside is located beneath the ground is the second, most likely because we often bury our dead. So the leap to that being the location for the afterlife can be understood. But it's the third commonality that strikes us as odd. Familiars, creatures tied to gods, is nothing new, but the death gods seem to really be drawn to canines and birds to accompany souls specifically. Not any one of the other creepy crawlies that make their homes burrowing under the canopy of the Amazon rainforest. The Mayans had Apush, led by a flock of owls and a pack of hounds. The Inca had Supai, who donned a jaguar head. Modern-day Mexico and Brazil have Santa Muerta and San La Muerta, respectively. Both skeletal figures clad in tattered black hoods, followed by owls, ravens, and crows. Even the Caribbean has variations of the same thing in their voodoo figures of death. Baron Samedi is the gangster version of a god of death. He smokes cigars, drinks rum, and adorns himself with a silver cane and royal purple and black robes. Even though he is described as a dark-skinned, hauntingly handsome man, his face is painted to resemble a skeleton at all times. Modern and ancient, all of the South American and Caribbean cultures believe that the afterlife takes place underground. Up in North America, the story rings very much the same. The Native Americans and Canadians aren't prone to describe their central religious figures with physical features. Most of them are simply described as dark spirits, usually with eagles and owls preceding them to announce their arrival. Tarzet and Okius follow war and violent death, bringing along their wolves and ravens to help them reap souls from the battlefield. We cannot visit the African continent without mentioning Egypt first. Anubis is as infamous to the concept of dying as the Grim Reaper is to Europe. Anubis is the jackal-headed god of embalming, and the one who weighs your heart against a feather to determine where it is that you deserve to go to. Whilst directly linked to this final judgment, Anubis was at times also seen as a gentle guide, ensuring safe passage into the afterlife and protecting souls rather than condemning them. Jackals are known to scavenge in graveyards, so that might be why this particular canine was the choice to represent the most iconic of death gods. But Anubis isn't the only entity that likes to keep canines to drag their hard-won souls down to the underground depths in Africa. Ghana has Owuo, the skeleton figure that swoops in with its billowing black robes and revels in decay and suffering. Here, the lore takes an unexpected turn. Ghanaians believe that Owuo killed the divine great creator god, putting inevitable death above the sanctity of life indefinitely. A stark change from the narrative that most cultures believe, that if you are good and righteous, that you will exist in some form of spiritual heaven forever. Owuo makes sure that this cannot happen, because he cannibalizes the dead instead of taking their souls somewhere under the earth. But none give a more prophetic view of the afterlife than the Khoikhoi people of southern Africa. They are believed to be one of the oldest living peoples in the world. Their views on life and death are some of the most ancient in existence, and also an eerily similar view as we see later with European and Middle Eastern beliefs. They have the light heaven ruled by the creator Sui Goab, whose polar opposite, Gaunob, revels in chaos, confusion, and death. He takes the wicked to a place that translates to the words Black Heaven, simply described as a shadow figure made out of darkness and destruction. The Middle East is thought to be the earliest place we find written and pictographic records of their then beliefs. Undoubtedly, the whole of the Middle East's religious and cultural ways during the Neolithic period laid the groundwork for Egypt's later adaptations of their belief system. But this first record also brings the next commonality among death deities, the number 3, that seems to crop up everywhere. Starting with Mesopotamia, we first find Alat. She was the goddess of death and was worshipped as a triad of goddesses that eclipsed the entire belief system. The 3 goddesses ruled over the 3 major cities, with Alat being the central figure of war, disease, and all of the other things that brought on death. Mesopotamia later moved over to the worship of Eresh-Kigal during the Bronze Age, though both are mentioned in the Quran, some 4,000 years after they begin to appear, figures that certainly maintained a presence for a significant time, to say the least. Eresh-Kigal is a dark female entity whose realm is guarded by 7 gates that are watched over by owls. She makes up 3 of the divine realms that are split between heaven, the earth, and the underworld. Most Mesopotamian festivals and burials were held along a 3-day period, much like the later Canaanites did. The Canaanites' god of death, Mot, was a consumer of all things living. Animals, plants, and humans were all devoured by its gaping mouth, and wherever Mot's decaying feet landed, everything was made sterile. Men, plants, and animals, all devoid of life. By the time the Middle East began trading with Asia through the infamous Silk Road, the various Asian groups had long since been practicing their own rituals related to gods that sprang up without the influence of the Middle East. Here, most of the gods themselves are no longer humanoid. They've morphed into horned spirits of chaos and despair. The Japanese were the only people back then whose personification of death was once a human being. Izanami died in childbirth, and through her loss and sorrow, she became the guardian of the dead. But the grief turned her into a partially decayed hag, her skin crawling with maggots, shrouded in shadow, and followed by her anguished wails. The Turks and Mongolians also had a horned being, somewhat reminiscent of Satan. Clad in red and black, Erlich followed behind war and plague with his pack of wolves, or dogs. The Buddhist religion wasn't far behind the Turks though. The remarkable thing about Buddhism is that their belief system started around the same time that the Mesopotamians did, yet it hasn't changed all that much in modern times. Meet Mara, the dark force of illusion and temptation, the multi-armed representation of the 3 poisons: desire, hatred, and ignorance. Mara even had 3 daughters that embodied each of these 3 poisons individually. Representing the unavoidable fate that awaits us all, he's also the leader of a demonic army that sows fear and inner turmoil. An interesting aside at this point: the whole of Asia believed that the afterlife took place inside the earth. Europe, on the other hand, it seems, took inspiration from every corner of the earth and meshed it into one. All of the themes, spread across the globe and separated by millennia, comes together here. Black dogs or wolves and birds are prevalent as predictors of death. Always, the evildoers go downward when their days on this world come to an end. And almost all of the law's physical representations are old women, fearsome demonic beings, or skeletons. And as you probably expect by now, the number 3 is significant across Europe too. The Celts came first with Don, Anku, and Morrigan. It's hard to say which of the 3 predates the other, but Morrigan was the mythological figure that prevailed in the end. She is one of 3 sisters, with her role being the one to take charge of souls who have passed on, especially during war. She is accompanied by a fleet of crows, and can turn into one herself, if she's not in the mood to walk around as a crooked old woman, that is. Anku is the skeleton who wore a wide-brimmed hat, black robes, and who carried a scythe. Undoubtedly, Anku inspired the modern-day Grim Reaper, and possibly the lesser-known Hatman, who is thought to be a demonic entity. Though Anku was even more impressive than the later version. He drove a black carriage drawn by a pair of lightning-fast black horses. Shifting slightly, we have Nords, with Hel and Odin, to depict their hellish and heavenly entities. Hel was the twisted crone, the daughter of Loki, and a giantess. Half of her is young, alive, and beautiful, while the other half is dead, decayed, and monstrous. Yet while often depicted as cold and distant, she was not purely cruel. She was often seen as providing a peaceful final resting place for those who did not die in battle, acting more as a caretaker than a tormentor. So yet again, we are presented with intriguing contrasts. Harsh, haggard judgment, set against a gentler, and at times even compassionate, interpretation. Whilst not always the case, this is a recurring theme amongst many of these gods of death. Helheim, from which we later got the word hell, lies beneath the three roots of the sacred tree Yggdrasil. And, of course, the creatures who accompany these powerful figures. Helheim, where hell rules, is guarded by Garmo, a wolf-like creature who is almost as feared as his mistress, with Odin, who represents the light place where brave souls go, of course flanked by his two black ravens as familiars. The Nords and the Celts heavily influenced each other's view of their gods, just as the Romans and the Greeks did, but the Mediterranean didn't stray far from the rest of Asia and the Middle East in terms of vengeful gods who treated humanity like little more than insects. If anything, they took it up a notch. The fact that they traded more intensely with other cultures certainly shows up in their mythology. We all know of the Greek god Hades, the guardian of the underworld, and his monstrous three-headed black dog Cerberus. The Roman version, Pluto, also had Cerberus as his familiar. The Romans extended their lore to include Mors, the personification of death itself. This time, taking from the Nords and the Celts, with a skeletal figure that was accompanied by crows or carrion birds. Let us move next to Eastern Europe, where the Slavs and the general Germanic folk lived. They're found smack in the middle of the Ottoman Empire to the far east, the Greeks down south, and the Nordic and Celtic kingships up to the northwest. These nations generally associated their bringers of death with winter, darkness, and cold, which isn't surprising given the harsh, freezing conditions the Slavs had to endure annually. The Eastern Slavs had Morana and Veles. Morana is almost identical to the Celtic Morgana, an old woman who creeps in the shadows, using crows to send messages between the realms or to warn of her arrival. Her male counterpart, the elderly hermit, was Veles, a shapeshifter that took the forms of snakes, dragons, wolves, and bears. Veles had a dark sense of humor about him, personified by his enjoyment in stealing cattle or other gods' wives. Don't let this description trick you into thinking he was a more light-hearted entity. He inspired more fear than Morana, due to his habit of luring people away into the wilderness, never to be seen again. In a similar vein, with a fun twist, Morozko was the old man of Russia who dwelled in winter. Now tell us if he sounds familiar to you. Morozko was a kindly old man, accompanied by a bear or a wolf. He had a long white beard and white robes, who liked to bring gifts to those who were good. He was unusually generous for a god. His gifts always came in sets of 3. Sounds kind of like Santa Claus, doesn't it? Well, this Santa also liked to punish those who were rude, usually by means of turning them to ice. Another pairing, this time of Germanic origin, we have Chernobog, the horned shadow with red eyes, and his contrast, Beloborg, who was the personification of light and all that is good. This later became their depiction of Satan and his demons, as both Satan and Chernobog bring bad luck, curses, and misfortune, often leading to the recipient's death. It wasn't until the 14th century that the Germanic nations got a deity specifically attributed to death, and the being that took them to the afterlife, the ghastly and utterly devastating bubonic plague, would be the gateway that led to the Grim Reaper finally making an appearance that persisted to our modern day. He took Anku's scythe, wears the tattered robes of the crones, and bears the skeletal visage of so many others before him. Somewhat like the lesser Greek god Thanatos, a peaceful and merciful bringer of death, associated primarily with guiding souls to the other side, and akin to the Hindu god Yama, a compassionate figure who helps souls understand their karma and reincarnation path. The Grim Reaper remains impartial. He takes no heed of wealth or status, serving only as the guide who delivers souls to the place where their judgment awaits. The Grim Reaper has no friends, no enemies, and he does no one any favors. But is that not what the main takeaway of our short existence on this plane really is all about? You will be born and you will die. How you face judgment and where you go according to the results of that judgment, well, we'll leave that up to you to decide. But it's almost certain, by the looks of things, that no matter what you believe, your departure will most likely be in the company of a canine or a bird. Your guide will be old and seemingly decrepit, and they'll lead you to the center of the earth, most likely to await some kind of judgment. The fact that these deities and beliefs have the same themes and details to them throughout the world, separated by centuries and millennia, doesn't really matter. It appears what does is whether or not your life was good. The god of death is coming for us all eventually. How ready are you to be judged? Maybe you'll feel a little better if you like and subscribe to the Vortex, where mythology, legend, and reality collide. And do feel free to pass this on to a friend. Or if you aren't ready to exit the supernatural spiral just yet, why not check out some of our other videos? We'll meet you at the crossroads of time on the next one.